Hello hipsters, Kris here from the podcast. Just hitting you up with a bit of information on our sponsors. We are very happy to say this season we are backed for the season by Kris and his team at 4elementswebdesign.co.uk. That's where you'll find them. You'll also find them on Twitter at 4elementsDES. What do 4Elements do? Well, if you're looking to build yourself the most hipsterish website possible, they are the guys for you. Branding, web design, marketing, video production, they're the four main elements, but they also look at so much more besides. Don't forget their tagline, beautiful websites, brands and strategic marketing solutions to take your business to the next level. Hit up Kris and his team, let them know that we sent you, and he might give you a little present. No promises, but what he will do is give you a fantastic website. So just a reminder, that is 4elementswebdesign.co.uk. And now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to the Football Hipsters Podcast Specials. It's Kris, your host, once again. I always want to say back again like the Renegade Master, but I'm not going to, but I already have, so never mind. I'm going to introduce to you my crew for this very special MLS-themed podcast. It's been a little while since we've all got around a table, metaphorically, of course. But first of all, I've got my chief button presser in command. It's Mr. Josh Dorr. Hello, Josh.
Good evening, Kris, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world.
Indeed. For us, it's, 1:45 on December the 2nd, so living the dream. It's not 1:45, however, in the US of A. So first of all, it's Mr. Jimmy, Mr. Ananguna. Hello, Jimmy, how are you?
Greetings, Kris, how are we?
All good, mate, all good. What time is it? You're in DC, aren't you?
I'm actually in Virginia, Williamsburg, Virginia, and it is currently 8:45 in the morning.
Fantastic. See, that's commitment, listeners. Getting out of bed at this time of the morning to record with us lot. You've got to love that. And we've got a fourth party as well. Good morning as well to Mr. Pat Ormsby. Hello, Pat.
Good morning. I, however, have not gotten out of bed. I'm sitting in bed right now, but awake, alive, alert.
That's an image for you. And you're based in Seattle?
I'm a fan of Seattle, but I actually just moved north of DC. So while Jimmy is south of DC, I am north.
So you're representing Seattle from afar. That's what we like to hear. It's kind of like me and Josh living in Brighton and Plymouth, but supporting Arsenal. So you are in Brighton, aren't you, Josh?
I am right now, yeah. But I also support Brighton, which can help with my location. I'm only 50 miles away from London, so it's all you, Kris. You're a bad fan.
You see, podcast listeners, you don't only get the benefit of our football knowledge, but also you get geographical insight as well. So, I mean, what more could you want from life? And indeed, a Saturday morning. Right, enough waffle. Let's talk some football / soccer, because we're going to have to use the American term as well, because we have lots of American listeners. I know we do. We have lots of tweets whenever we do these specials, and indeed fans of MLS from around Europe as well. So to sort of just kick us off, I just want to ask both Pat and Jimmy their thoughts on the season as a whole, just a kind of a general sum up on how they feel the season's gone. We are, of course, recording this off the back of the two semi-finals being finalised. We know who's in the final. More on that later. So, Jimmy, let's start with you. How have you enjoyed this season in MLS? Has it been a good season? Has it been an upgrade season on when we last recorded for you?
I'd say so. Well, as a DC United fan, it was my own team. It wasn't very fun. It was kind of a little bit miserable. But as a fan of the league as a whole, I really enjoyed it. It was one thing we kind of saw was that in the past few years, the league has been heavily dominated by the Western Conference, and the East was just kind of trying to hang on to stay relevant. But there's kind of a shift in prominence this year with the here on. Being on the East Coast, I kind of tend to follow the Eastern clubs a little closer, and there were some really good matchups this year, and some really good games. I think with the introduction of Atlanta United and Minnesota United, particularly the former, it added an entirely new element that we hadn't really seen in the past. See a team kind of rise to prominence in its first season like that was pretty impressive. And I think it's kind of what we can expect, at least from the bigger market teams that are going to be coming in the future as well. But overall, I was very pleased with the league in and of itself, and kind of taking a neutral standpoint. Really, every game I watched, there's only a few ones that I really found myself quite bored by. Most of them were quite exciting. So overall, I'd say that the season was a success.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with pretty much all of that. I've quite enjoyed watching the games from over here late at night in the UK. Certainly some teams we will pick up on in a moment. But Pat, what about for you? I mean, obviously your side has had a lovely old season again, and could well have an even better season once again in a week's time. But overall, for the sort of the league as a whole, and some of the changes that have been made, some of the new franchises, has it been a enjoyable, successful season for you?
Yeah, I would say that despite my club affiliation, it's just been a really interesting season overall. There's been a lot of talk over the past few years, like maybe 2014 through 2016, the league kind of just becoming the same old run of the mill. The Red Bulls do well, the Galaxy do well, the teams that traditionally do well have done well. But this year, Atlanta and Minnesota shook everything up, and found that very interesting. Let's see, the Chicago Fire, they're back to winning ways, which I know you're probably very happy about.
I am.
And it's always good for the league when a big city like Chicago, and it's such a historic club like Chicago, can do so well. But there are very few teams that I would consider irrelevant to the season. Everyone had a part to play, whether it was clubs that traditionally do very well were at the absolute bottom of the league, or new clubs coming in like Atlanta United doing well, making headlines, or Toronto FC or New York City FC making headlines with their great seasons. I'd say overall it was a very interesting season, and everywhere you looked, there was a team making headlines with something, and not just your run-of-the-mill, I don't like clickbait headlines. There wasn't anything that wasn't actually interesting that the media and journalists were trying to play off as interesting.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that one. And there's been, we'll probably talk about some of the sort of the names that come into the league this season. And indeed, I think for the first time in, maybe this is harsh, but for the first time in quite a while, there's players in MLS now that are attracting the eyes of some of Europe's bigger clubs to take them, not sort of to put them across to MLS to finish a career, but actually being interested in bringing them out of MLS and into the European games. We might touch on a few of those a little bit later on. Josh, just before we sort of launch into some teams and have a bit of a chat about some of the stories that we've looked at over the season, what have you made of? I know we're not going to lie to the listeners. It's not a league you follow sort of as closely as maybe at home as we do with the Premier League in Europe, but you've seen a few games. You're a big Jack Harrison fan, who's of course broken into the England under-21 system this season. That's quite a big step forward for the game in the States. Have you had a team that you particularly liked watching, or any standout moments from this season that has drawn you in a little bit?
Yeah, I spent some time in North America over the summer as well, so I managed to kind of get a vibe of the atmosphere that you get, especially with Brits abroad. Not only talking Jack Harrison, New York City FC, but I was in Vancouver whilst they played the aforementioned New York, and just talking to some friends who have emigrated out there, and just what the vibe is really interesting to hear. I haven't yet hunched for a team yet, but I'm just looking through rosters at the moment. I've gone full American. I'm now calling them rosters. They're not squads anymore. But so long as I can find some time in my schedule instead of watching the NFL, to move back to watching proper football, then perhaps I shall find a team for next season.
Yes, or we will find one for you, one of the two. Perhaps we'll do a listener poll and see who we can get. But then the trouble is our listeners will sabotage you and put you with a really awful side. But yes, I think it's definitely sort of a league that has grown in popularity in Europe, particularly with have to give a little nudge to the Sky Sports empire. They do some very good coverage, albeit commentary from Ian Dowie isn't always a highlight, but it is good coverage over here, and at least you got the opportunity to see some games, whereas you wouldn't have been able to previously. So pat on the back to them, but that's enough Sky patting of backs. Let's talk about some of the action this season then. Pat, I'm gonna start with you with regards to the Eastern Conference, because maybe our newer listeners may not know it's the league's split into two conferences, the Eastern and Western. Toronto FC, or TFC as they're affectionately known, are the Eastern Conference champions. The past week that's gone by has confirmed that, where they've I think they've deserved it overall. I didn't think they were that convincing against Columbus Crew over the two legs of the semi-final, but they got the job done. Overall, what's been your impressions of Toronto FC before we look at the rest of the league this season?
Excuse me. Toronto is really interesting because I don't know how long any of you guys have followed the league, but back in 2013, 2014, they were bottom of the league. They were a laughing stock. Like, anytime you had Toronto at home on your schedule, that was usually a free 3 points, so, good for them. Good on them for turning around in such a few years from laughingstock to, just powerhouse in the entire, not just the Eastern Conference, but the entire league. They, they only lost 5 games all season, which for a league where there are salary caps and, limits on how many players you can have on your roster and how many players of certain types you can have on your roster. They did a really good job of, they won 20 games during the season in a 34-game season. They have the highest points total in league, or one of them in league. I believe it's the highest points total in league history. I might be misspeaking on that, but they were just, they had their system and they would play their system, and they weren't afraid to change as well throughout throughout the year. So I'd say very deservingly Eastern Conference champions.
Yeah, I think overall, if you look at the grand scheme of things, they probably did deserve that. And Jimmy, we should talk about obviously that semi-final they got through on Columbus Crew. Jose Altidore proving the hero of the second leg, kind of on one leg. He got a bit of an ankle injury, but he did score what proved to be the winner. If you count it over 2 legs, technically it wasn't, but you know what I mean. Giovinco is another one which I think Josh is going to have a little chat about in a minute. But overall, Altidore is probably the other big name. Is there any other players in that TFC lineup that maybe won't get the credit that they not necessarily deserve, but they won't grab the highlights or the headlines from people? I look at maybe the goalkeeping situation, for example. And I've been quite impressed with Victor Vasquez as well. I think he's made 35 appearances, and Michael Bradley's another one that certainly people stateside will know all about. What sort of players have impressed you with TSC?
Oh, absolutely. The great thing about Toronto FC this season is the fact that they are stacked at pretty much every position and have depth at every position as well, which is I think that's one of the reasons why they've done so incredibly well this season. They, if I'm not mistaken, they actually tied the most number of points ever accumulated in a single season. I think it's either they tied it or they beat it. But they had, and I think it's completely down. You have to give head coach Greg Vanney some credit there, but the talent they were able to bring in was incredible. Obviously, most people are going to focus on their 3 designated players, being Giovinco, Altidore, and Bradley. But like you said, Victor Vasquez, I think he has a shout of competing at least for the most valuable player this year. He was he was incredible. His vision and his ability to play a pass, especially when you have such great attackers like Giovinco and Altidore, he played a massive part in their success this year. Also, they had some really kind of unsung heroes in the midfield, thinking particularly of Marky Delgado. Delgado, he kind of played more of a just kind of a box-to-box type role, more than number 8, where Bradley would kind of sit behind. But he had just a ridiculous engine and was able to kind of control everything from the midfield. Watching him was a lot of fun. And then they're one of the only teams that I know of, or I can think of off the top of my head, in MLS that is currently playing a 3-5-2, but they are making it work so well. And that's down to a few different players. I'd say the first one being center back Drew Moore. Drew Moore is one of my favorite players in MLS right now. He's not the tallest, but he is really good at marshaling that back line, and I think he's definitely the leader there from the back. So he deserves all the credit in the world for that. And the other thing that really makes their system tick is the fact that they have excellent wingbacks. Justin Morrow and Stephen Beitashour have been there for a couple seasons now, and they're both just what they are able to do up and down the wings. That is incredible. They're able to defend, but they're also excellent in the attack as well, which allows for Vanny to kind of chuck an extra midfielder in the mix to shore up the middle of the park there. And I know both of them are getting a little bit older, but as long as they're there and they're performing, and even if one of them goes down, they recently brought in a new guy somewhere in Scandinavia named Nicholas Hasler, who just slotted right in when Beitashour was out for a long period of time and just picked right up where he left off. And plus, if you look at the bench, the likes of Jonathan Osorio at kind of more of attacking midfield, and Armando Cooper, that central midfielder position there. I can't speak highly enough to the talent they brought in and the fact that the talent plays so well together. And I don't, being a fan of a different Eastern Conference team, I don't even particularly like TFC, but it's just hard for me not to praise with what they've done.
Yeah, very, very, very fair that, because you could have just gone, no, I'm not talking about them, bugger and balls to them. But no, fair play to you, picked out some good players there. And yeah, Hassler, it always reminds me of the German. Josh will know what I mean here. I think back, I think it's 94, Thomas Hassler. I think it's pronounced Hassler, but I always think of that when I see the back of his shirt. But speaking of backs of shirts, Josh, it would be unfair of me to not give you some time to talk about the Atomic Ant, Mr. Giovinco. Fair to say he's not quite come back running since his, well, obviously running, but not hit the ground running since his injury. He looked a bit rusty the other night in the game against Columbus, but he's still having a lovely old time in MLS, isn't he?
Yeah, definitely. It was for me a shock move when he actually went over there, because when you saw the big kind of designated players coming across in recent times, it was, like we said, Altidores, Shakars, David Beckham's, these big names who are at the end of their career, really. Although saying Josie Altidore had a career in the first place perhaps is a little too strong. But with Giovinco coming over, it was just a big kind of refresh, and I think it was exactly what the league needed. And it was quite easy to see that perhaps he might not be able to cope with everything, with his kind of fitness issues, but overall he's been a revelation, and I think this season as well, it's just shown that what a great outfit Toronto are. And yeah, I think absolutely superb player, can do everything, and I think is definitely one of those big players that has come into the league and given it a big kick up the backside and made everyone else move on, which is what you need for a growing league.
Yeah, star power always helps, doesn't it? And he is clearly a head turner. I think he was maybe slightly lucky not to get back into the Italian squad at least once during the course of the season. But alas, let's not talk about Italy because it will make John cry. Jimmy also wanted to point out, I think it's Chris Mabinga, if I'm not mistaken, is another one we probably should have given some praise to. Started out as fourth choice centre back, ended up as second choice. It's always nice when a player doesn't start the season as regular and works his way in. So fair play to him as well. Pat, we should just give a brief bit of love to the Crew, who at the end of regular standings they actually finished fifth. In the standings. Again, for new listeners, you might not know that there's the playoff system, there's the top two, and then there's four below those go off into a sort of a playoff system. Just a quick word for Columbus Crew before we cherry pick the best of the rest from the Eastern.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I just want to say all the love to the Columbus Crew and their fans right now. They're going through a lot of uncertainty with their club right now, who may be relocating in the 2019 season. We'll keep that short. Hashtag save the Crew. But, at the beginning of the season, I believe Jimmy and I, when we wrote up our season preview, we had the Crew finishing probably 8th or 9th in the standings for the Eastern Conference, as well as most people didn't have them in the playoffs, let alone making it to the conference final. So hats off to them. They were outstanding this season. Their run into the playoffs were fantastic, and we've seen it with the past few years with the Sounders and the Portland Timbers, as well as the Galaxy, that consistent winning and form at the end of the season really carries into the playoffs and can get you far. So they did outstanding. They have a young goalkeeper named Zach Steffen, who, if there are any U.S. men's national team fans out there, that you might, you're hoping for some youth to come through to the national team. That's one player to keep an eye on. He had probably the game of his life in Atlanta for a penalty shootout at the beginning of the playoffs that got them that kickstarted their playoffs. So they did really well. They were a ton of fun to watch throughout the season. And sorry, I misspoke. I had the Crew outside of the playoff. Jimmy had them at 6th. They finished 5th. So Jimmy was the closest without going over, so he wins the Columbus Crew prediction for the 2017 season.
Jimmy gets to own Columbus Crew for that. No, absolutely. And I'm with you on Zach Steffen, by the way. I'm quite a fan of, I don't know why, it's just something about me. I'm quite a fan of young goalkeepers in leagues. I always like to find like the next sort of big goalkeeper coming through the ranks. As a lad at Arsenal, funny enough, at the moment, called Hugo Keita. Josh, am I right? I think it's Hugo Keita. I always like to sort of keep an eye on young goalkeepers, see how they progress, because I think it's one of those positions that there is no way out if you're a young goalkeeper and you make massive mistakes. And when you look at, I don't know, someone like Joe Hart's a good example, who had all the promise as a young goalkeeper and now is sort of declining so fast, even though he's only, Josh, help me out, 27, 28, Joe Hart now?
Joe Hart is 28 off the top of my head.
There you go.
Probably should have stopped being in the England team since about 25, but
yeah,
agendas aside.
And at that age, that's not old for a goalkeeper, is it? So I think when you get a goalkeeper like Zach Steffen, or we mentioned Alex Bono earlier on from Toronto FC, and Donnarumma is probably the obvious one in Europe, but I always like to see a young goalkeeper who can take command of a established side. So yeah, definitely a good
interesting thing on goalkeepers. Not seen a big American goalkeeper come out for a while.
No,
I saw third choice goalkeeper this week, was it, for the national team, was 38, 39?
Yeah, Friedel and Howard, and yeah, it's all old names, isn't it?
Yeah.
Brad Guzan, yeah.
Yeah, where have they all gone? I think that's a question for Jimmy and Pat. Where are the new, where's the next gen goalkeepers?
Well, Jimmy's a big fan of Bill Hamid, aren't you, Jimmy?
Right, there's a few ones coming through. I'll admit I'm slightly biased on Bill Hamid because up until this, just after the season ended, he was a DC United's goalkeeper. But I think a lot of people out there will agree that Bill Hamid really is the best American goalkeeper at the moment. He does struggle a little bit with fitness. He has a tendency to get knocks on the regular and have to sit out for a couple months. But the things that he's shown in goal have been absolutely spectacular. But he's not alone. if anyone saw the U.S. men's national team match against Portugal a few weeks ago, they would have seen Ethan Horvath, and I will admit, he had an absolute that was an absolute ricket. That was one of the worst goals I've ever seen anyone concede. But I don't think that really shows who he is and what he's capable of. So I think Horvath is definitely worth looking out for to challenge him. But I think Stefan is definitely should be in that conversation as well, and needs to be pushing those two. There's a couple others as well. Sean Johnson. In the past, David Bingham has had a shout, but he's kind of died down. But I think it is about time that the men's national team has had a reboot in terms of a goalkeeper, because the ones we had were great when they were in their prime, but are definitely on the downside of their careers. And while the whole team really needs a refresh, I think the goalkeeper we saw was definitely a place where that needs to happen. And I'm optimistic about this new group of goalkeepers we have coming through. I think that someone is going to emerge from that as being the strong favorite, and with the others right behind them pushing them for that spot. I think we're going to see that become one of our strong points once again.
Yeah, there's Blake as well at Philadelphia. I think he's Jamaican, isn't he? I think he's 26, 27 now, but he's always impressed when I've seen him. But I suppose he can't be classed as up and coming. But yeah, there are a few. Don't talk to me about Sean Johnson though. It's sore.
If I may interject just for a minute, I just want to give a quick round of applause to everyone for making it 15, 20 minutes into this podcast, waiting 15 to 20 minutes to bring up the U.S. men's national team. So well done.
Don't worry. There will be a 5-minute chat about that at the end. I'm saving that one. Don't you worry. I'm not letting
argument.
Yes, so I'm not going to let that stone be left unturned, because I'm sure people will want to talk. Josh will have to send me a disciplinary letter for mentioning international football for it, but I'm going to go there. So, okay, let's sort of round up kind of best of the rest in the Eastern Conference then. We're not going to go through every team because we would be here forever. So let's just get a bit of best of the rest. So, Jimmy, let's give you an opportunity first. Anybody else that you want to mention in the Eastern Conference? You can by all means touch on your beloved DC, who, fair to say, didn't have a stellar season, and by all means mention my Chicago Fire if you will. But any other teams you want to highlight in the Eastern Conference?
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and touch on DC United first, just to get it over with and try to make sure I don't end up weeping bitter tears through the remainder of this podcast. I predicted that DC United would finish third in the Eastern Conference this season at the very beginning. We ended up dead last, and it wasn't even close. DC just really could not find their scoring, the ability to score, their shooting boots to save their lives. We brought in a Costa Rican striker by the name of Jose Ortiz, who was supposed to be able to challenge Patrick Mullins for that starting spot, and it turned out that neither one of them could get anything going. In fact, Patrick Mullins, who in half a season last year became our top scorer, was only able to net 5 goals the entire season, and 4 of those came in one game that thankfully I happened to be at, so I got to see I got to see 2 of the goals, but that's a story for another day. But the fact that we weren't able to score, and the fact that while the defense was okay, our midfield was just completely absent. We just got run through. So I think with the new stadium coming up, we're going to have some improvement to look forward to. We have a new source of cash flow, and hopefully we'll see some better talent come in. We towards the end of the year, we saw some really good players actually come in. That gives me a lot of hope, particularly Paul Arriola, who is a regular men's national team player. So it's been a long time since we last had an actual regular national team player. We've had Steve Birnbaum, who has gotten a few looks, and I think we'll still get looks in the future, but he hasn't really been a regular. So it's nice to have someone who's actually an exciting name to look forward to. So I think that's all I'm going to really say about DC, just because every time I talk about it, it makes me sad. But with your Chicago Fire, now that was a story that I knew that with the offseason moves they made that they were going to improve, but I didn't think they were going to improve as much as they did. With 4 or 5 moves they made, they completely turned that team on its head, particularly on the addition of Nemanja
Nikolic.
There you go. I can't.
Yes.
My
man.
teeth in.
It is early. It is early in the morning. You're allowed. It's fine.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Nikolic came in first year in the league, walks away with the golden boot. I don't think anyone saw that coming. What a season he had. He was just sliding away left and right. Didn't hurt that he had some new additions in midfield that helped him a lot, particularly Dax McCarty, Juninho, and the legend that is Bastian Schweinsteiger all came in the season, and particularly Schweinsteiger and McCarty just plugged that hole that they had in the center of midfield for so long, and they did an absolute fantastic job. Schweinsteiger coming in and showing why he's held in such high regard, just being the complete leader, marshaling the entire team from the middle of the field. I got to see him live in the flesh up at RFK, DC United's home ground. Watching him was an absolute pleasure. I'm not sure what we're going to see from him in the future. I know news just came out recently that they did not pick up Juninho's contract, so he's or didn't exercise the right to buy him. He was just on loan, so he'll be going back to his home club, and they're kind of quite understand they're kind of in negotiations to see about bringing back Schweinsteiger, but that's still a little bit up in the air. And McCarty's not exactly getting any younger, but so we'll have to kind of see who of that core they'll be able to bring back. Also, they lost one of their best. They're going to lose. It was announced today or early this week. They're going to lose one of their best defenders in João Mera. He's going back home to, I believe, Portugal. So that's going to definitely be going to hurt them. So hopefully, I kind of like the Fire. So I'm hoping that they're going to find a way to make it work going forward. But at the very least, they had one just absolutely stellar season, and I think Fire fans like yourself can definitely appreciate that. In terms of right, absolutely. In terms of other clubs to mention, I mean, there's only other ones I can really think of that warrant any kind of conversation. The first one being Atlanta United. They're being their first year in the league, and they made the playoffs in their first year, which has not happened in a long time, and they did it in style too. Atlanta was one of the best attacking teams that we've seen this year. They brought in some great international talent, particularly from Central and South America. I'm thinking Miguel Almiron and Joseph Martinez. As well as Julian Gressel as well in the middle of the park. He has a strong shot to be awarded the Rookie of the Year this year. He just did a fantastic job for them, and I think if they can sustain him, if they can keep some of these players, and I know some of them will probably be looking to move on to bigger and better things, but if they can kind of hold on to some of their core players, I think Atlanta's going to definitely be a team to watch in the future, as much as I don't want to admit it, since they stole our name and stole our colors. Not that I'm bitter about that at all. But for the neutral, I think they're going to be very exciting to watch. And then just to quickly touch on Orlando City, I know Pat is not a fan, but a bit of an admirer of theirs. I'm not so much, but they think they definitely underperformed a little bit this year. They had some really good talent on that team, even with Kaká missing a decent amount of it through injury and such. They could not get it together, and I think they're going to have to look for ways to revamp that team, because with all the talent they have, especially up top, they should not be underperforming as much as they have. So I think we're gonna see some changes for them in the offseason as well, because with the likes of Kyle Laren, and they traded midseason for Dom Dwyer, along with the Giles Barnes and Perez Garcia out wide. They really should have been doing better than they did. I'm interested to see what moves they're going to make here in the offseason.
Yeah, busy time, of course, during the off-season. It's much like the transfer window works very differently, of course, in the US, but teams already frantically trying to get signatures sorted out and players to come in. The only other teams we really wanted to pick up on, just to let our listeners know sort of a bit about, as Jimmy touched on there, DC ended up finishing bottom of the Eastern Conference with Orlando, Montreal, Philadelphia Union, New England above those, with the Red Bulls crew at Atlanta, the Fire third, and the New York City FC and Toronto. Don't worry, Josh, I'm going to come to you in a second for a little bit of Harrison Love and maybe a bit of David Villa as well. But before I do, Pat just wants to give us the New York perspective from the Eastern Conference, the Red Bulls and New York City FC. In the times I've watched them, Pat, New York City, one word comes to mind: goals, both ends. And Red Bulls, when I've watched them this season, the one word that comes to me is underwhelming. What was your thoughts on soccer in New York this season?
Yeah, for any of the listeners and for any of you that don't know, I actually just moved to the DC area. I used to live in New York, not the city, a couple hours north of New York City. So I have a lot of friends on both sides, and I'm going to upset a lot of the Red Bulls fans that I know and love very much. But I'm going to say that this season we definitely saw not so much a power shift, because that's a little extreme for what it was this season. Both teams got knocked out in the same stage of the playoffs, but almost a leveling out. For the first time in the club's history, New York City won 2 of the 3 games against the Red Bulls and drew the 3rd during the regular season. But we're definitely seeing, let's say, the beginning of a power shift, unless New York Red Bulls can get everything together. This is just another, we're seeing the blue New York come through more often, with the likes of David Villa, Jack Harrison, a few other players. They signed a new number 10, Maxi Morales, who was really good at the beginning of the season. Tapered off a little at the end of the season, but he was really great. We saw the end of Pirlo's career, which is sad to see him go, but he actually just had more of a squad player role this season, mentoring younger players throughout the season. We didn't see him a whole lot during the regular season. But what I will give to the New York Red Bulls is that their academy system with their young players is fantastic. We're going to see a lot of great young names coming through the Red Bulls. One name that I feel like I hear at least 5 times a day on a few different American soccer podcasts is Tyler Adams, who can play as a central midfielder, usually defensive, but he can play outright. He will play right back at times. He's really exciting. I think he might be 17 or 18. He's a really young guy. I don't know if I'm correct in this, but I believe he got called up for the Portugal game, and he had a hand in that U.S. men's national team game. But he's a really exciting player. The Red Bulls are definitely excited. Thank you, Jimmy. He did get called up to the Portugal game. But the Red Bulls can be exciting. They went to Chicago and got sorry, Kris, a fairly big win. They won 4-0 to Chicago on the first leg of the playoffs. So on any given day, they can be exciting. But yeah, of the two, New York City was definitely more fun to watch.
Yeah, I think it's. Thanks for mentioning that game. Actually, that's very much appreciated. Yeah, I think when I guess if you're not a fan or I say not a fan, if you're a casual kind of a watcher of football, you just happen to tune into that MLS, you just assume that the New York clubs are going to be the big hitters. I guess it's kind of like somebody who doesn't watch English football, and they just assume the clubs from London are going to be good. It's just one of those weird anomalies that people do, but largely underwhelming. But we do have to give a little bit of time to Josh to wax lyrical about some players he'll know all too well. So Josh, you want to talk a bit about Jack Harrison at New York City FC, and I'm sure you've got a bit of room for some Pirlo love and maybe a word for David Villa as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I did warn Jimmy that, if there was nothing to talk about for the MLS, I'd just talk about Jack Harrison all day because I love him. He's a great player. He's a winger for New York City, if people don't know. I've watched him mostly for England rather than for New York, just due to time differences, really. I only managed to catch a couple of games of his this season. But, yeah, absolutely superb player for England. It's a surprise it's taken him so long to break into the under-21s, bearing in mind when you go through the teams at all of the youth ages, he's the only one that's been consistently getting first-team football at a decent level, whereas the rest are all within academies. So you've got the likes of, you've got like Nelsons, the Willocks, just going through the Arsenal academy, that are all getting into the lower youth teams, but aren't really playing for their own sides or going out on loan. So that's what's kind of surprised me. It's taken so long to come from there. It's also interesting for us Brits to see one abroad. He's a bit like Eric Dyer for how his journey started, rather than family meant that he moved over to the States. Eric Dyer moved to Portugal and went through the Sporting Lisbon Academy, off the top of my head. He certainly broke through there. It's the same here, that started at youth academies in England, but then spent some time in Manhattan before breaking through in his senior career last season. Am I right? For Jimmy and Pat, it's 2016 season that he really broke through, and then this season's kind of cemented himself on that wing.
I believe so. I believe that. Well, this is only their third year in existence, but I think this last year was when he really brought himself into prominence. They kind of worked with some more veteran players the first season, but last year he really started to come into its own, and this year is when he really took off and started really impressing people.
In the 2016 MLS draft, Jack Harrison was the number one pick.
Wow, there you go. Yeah, that says it all. You're kind of following him, Josh, aren't you, really? Because once he got into that England under 21 side, I can't think of too many players who've been awarded caps for England or big nations from MLS at such a young age, but a player that has gone abroad, because he said, didn't he, that he left Manchester United's academy and his parents backed the decision for him to go abroad and make a career. And it does seem to be working, so he's clearly being watched.
Yeah, definitely. I think the links that New York have with another Manchester club will probably see him come back to this shore at some point. But it's nice to see that we've got that generation now of under-21 English players that are going abroad to get their footballing education. We've seen the likes of Reece Oxford, who's at Mönchengladbach at the moment. We've also got... which Willock brother is it at Benfica?
Chris Willock, isn't it? Yeah. Joe's in the academy, yeah.
Yeah, and the other one's up at Man United. The three brothers makes it very difficult to keep track of them. And there is one other who I cannot think off the top of my head who moved to another academy. Sancho.
Oh, Jadon Sancho at Dortmund.
Sancho went to Dortmund. So that's the kind of thing that's getting really interesting now, is to see these players go abroad, because you saw the likes of like Joe Hart's go to Torino last season, and admittedly, he had some poor games there, but he also had some great games, and I think he would have been better off staying or going abroad than going to West Ham this year. He would have certainly got a better football education and probably would have got a chance at sustained time in Europe. rather than what's happened at West Ham and their season. But overall, yeah, I think I really like Jack Harrison, and we can go on to Pirlo as what a player he is. I think, yeah, when I saw him play a couple of times this season, it was a bit like, is there anything left in the tank? It was kind of watching, you know, that player you always get at a five-a-side. He's pushing on the years. He's about 50 or so. Can't get round it, but if you give him any space or opportunity, yeah, he'll ruin you.
Stands at the back and sprays passes through midfield effortlessly. Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, Pirlo did that for Juve, but had a bit more bit in the legs. But coming over to New York City, I think Vieira had also looked to change the way that they were playing, and having a Pirlo in your team does really dictate exactly how the squad's going to play, because he is that kind of quintessential quarterback style player that everything goes through him, and he's just spraying balls out left, right, and centre. It'd
be interesting to see how long Vieira stays there as well, wouldn't it? Because I mean, he's being touted as somebody who's one of the next up and coming coaches, isn't he? I can't see Vieira wanting to be an assistant somewhere at a big club, if you will, quote unquote. I can't see Guardiola moving on, certainly not next season, maybe in 2 to 3 years, maybe. But it'd be interesting to see if he does resist the temptation to come back to Europe, or does stick around to stay in New York and build a bit of a legacy there. I don't know whether he'll be taken seriously if he does or not. It's a hard one, isn't it?
Well, I think there's the quality of managers that are coming into the MLS as well. Laurent Blanc has just joined Montreal. Am I right? I think it's Montreal that he's gone to.
Montreal just signed Remy Gard.
That's right,
Remy Gard.
Laurent Blanc's being talked about, isn't he?
Yeah.
Someone, I can't remember who it was. Yeah. Someone French.
I've heard his name bandied about for the national team job.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's right. Or not, but that's what I've heard.
There's a bit of talk around LAFC originally, wasn't there, as well, whether he might be. Yeah. No, it's...
So there are those options that bigger name managers that have done their thing in Europe are going over to MLS now to show their thing, and I'm not sure what Pirlo's plans are as well. I don't think he would be a manager per se.
No.
I don't think he's got that in him, but certainly as a number two, or just a coach level, whether or not he decides to stay in the US, or I think he's touted to be going to Chelsea, but you know, Conte's reign is should we say that could change at any minute.
Is AC Milan bound, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think there's something that we can see going on from there. But yeah, and as with David Villa, he's been able to put another 5-10 years on his career by moving to the MLS. 22
goals this season, just 2 behind Nikolic in the end. Yeah, I mean he's one of those players that he would score goals in any league. I mean he got back into the Spanish national side, didn't he, on the basis of his MLS form. He's just one of those players that I think, give him a chance, you'd back him over most players in the league to finish it. And he's just still class, isn't he?
And
him getting as well.
Yeah, him getting into the national team at that age and from MLS as well, because that was the thing when Giovinco moved over. That Conte was manager at the time of the national team and just said, well, you've gone to America, you're dead to me. You will not get into the team because you're not playing the quality of football. And arguably, going through the strikers that have had to put on that national team shirt, there's lesser players than Giovinco.
Talk about cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Yeah, absolutely.
Big time.
That is the Italian way, but I'll say under my breath. but yeah,
no, I know what you mean.
Absolutely, the 3 players there they're the big players that I look out for in MLS. Certainly at the beginning of the season, anyway. There's a couple that have come out of this season that I'm going to keep an eye on for the next.
Yeah. I think you've made some good points there, and again, as I say, like from people looking from the outside in that may not be huge followers of MLS, they're going to be looking at the bigger clubs and the bigger names as a result. So let's switch gears then into the Western Conference. It's sort of again mixed season for many of the bigger sides, particularly LA Galaxy, which I'm sure we'll come on to in a second. But Pat, we have to start with you, of course, because your Seattle Sounders are back into MLS Cup final again, having won their semi-final tie pretty comprehensively over the Houston Dynamo, who we probably could touch on as well, who've had a bit of a resurgence. No Owen Coyle in sight. But overall thoughts on the Western Conference. Portland Timbers actually technically won the conference, same level of points with Seattle Sounders, but won it on the gold. I think it's on head-to-head, isn't it, in the division? But overall thoughts on the Western Conference and any teams you really want to focus on, as well as your chance to wax lyrical about Seattle.
Yeah, well, thanks. I'll try not to focus too much on the Seattle Sounders because I'll end up bragging, and I don't think any of our listeners want to hear Jimmy cry on the other end. So I'll keep it brief. But yeah, they're facing Toronto again. We're for the first time since I believe 2012, both teams are returning to MLS Cup final, and it will also be at it'll be at Toronto again. So I've been looking at tickets. It might be a little too much out of my price range, but anyway, they kind of did last year, where they stumbled along towards the beginning of the season, saw what signings they needed to make during the summer transfer window, and they signed the right players. One of the biggest signings of the season, I'd say, is Gustav Svensson, who actually just made the World Cup with, I believe, Sweden. So that's very exciting. Yes, he's with the Swedish national team, but he's been playing center mid, right back, center back, whatever they needed him to do throughout the season. So he's been big. Clint Dempsey has returned from his injury, or his heart condition, which has been huge for the club because nobody wanted to see him kind of wither off and have to end his career because of an injury. So he's been great. They signed Will Bruin from the Houston Dynamo, who's a striker who's hitting form right now, which makes me really excited. On top of that, Nicolas Odero is still there. Young Jordan Morris. They picked up Harry Shipp, who was originally from Chicago. He's bounced around a few clubs. But yeah, overall, they're hitting form at the right time, and I'm really excited to see what goes on. But in terms of the rest of the West, the team that interested me the most throughout the season was the other expansion team. I kind of took the hipster pick with expansion clubs. I was more interested to see what Minnesota United would do in their first season in the league. Unlike Atlanta, they were an existing club in the second division that then bought their way into the first division, which we could get into that whole pro-rel thing another time. Don't get me started with that. But everyone had them picked to be bottom of the league. Just terrible. Their first few games, I believe Atlanta scored 6 or 7 goals on them in their very first home game. But they took a very interesting approach. They hired former Orlando City manager, Adrian Heath, who had done the expansion thing before with Orlando. And they came right out the gate saying, we're not going to sign any big name players. We already have our fan base. We're going to see what we can do with a roster. So I believe throughout the season, they didn't have a single designated player, but they still managed to finish 9th in the West. Not great, but they finished above Colorado Rapids and Los Angeles Galaxy, who were both in the playoffs last year. So they didn't have a terrible season. They went through the season, found their needs, and addressed those needs. They signed or they traded for former Columbus Crew winger Ethan Finley, who's actually a Minnesota. Like he grew up. He was born and raised and grew up in Minnesota, so I'm sure he was happy to be home. They had some pretty bad signings that they addressed as well, specifically center back. They had some pretty bad signings there, but I'd say exceeded expectations. They didn't have a great season by any means, especially when you compare them to Atlanta United. But so Minnesota was very interesting. Yeah.
It's been an interesting season actually for Minnesota, one that really interested me because they started that so badly, and okay, they ended up second bottom, but for a new franchise club, they did pick up as it went along. Jimmy, anybody that you want to pick focus on before we sort of shift gears into the sort of season, moving on into the playoffs, etc. Was there any teams that really stood out to you as huge disappointments or as surprise candidates? We mentioned the Dynamo, had a little touch on LA Galaxy there, but anything you want to add to the Western Conference?
Just to go off of what Pat just said about Minnesota, I was actually rather surprised. I thought I had pegged Minnesota to have a better season than Atlanta, to be honest, because they had brought in people that knew the league, but and they had some talented players they brought in, likes of Johan Venegas and Kevin Molino, who I thought were going to really kick on, but I was really surprised at how poorly they actually did. I think largely that had to do with their inexperienced or lack of MLS experienced defense. So I'm interested to see how they do in the future. Because I actually like their squad quite a bit. But I think the biggest disappointment for the season was FC Dallas. Dallas won the Supporters Shield last year. They had the most points last year of anyone in both conferences, and they won the U.S. Open Cup, which is kind of the MLS or the American equivalent of the FA Cup. But this season, they even missed out in the playoffs, which with the level of talent they have on that team is frankly inexcusable. Their head coach, Oscar Pareja, last year was being hailed as one of the best coaches in the league and a possible successor to Bruce Arena for the national team, and they really just fell off the map, which is really a bummer to see because what they did last year was excellent. I think largely that had to do with the fact that both Matt Hedges and Walker Zimmerman, their two star center backs, they hardly really got to play together at all. If one wasn't injured, the other one was for most of the season. And their fullbacks kind of kept changing around. And if they're going to, with the performance they put in this season, I think they could be in a risk of losing Mauro. I almost said Mauro Icardi. Mauro Icardi does not play for FC Dallas. Mauro Diaz, who has been their I'd say arguably, but I don't think it's really that arguable. Their best player of the last two seasons. If they're going to have to give him a reason to stick around, because if he wants to try his luck in South America or in Europe, I think there's plenty of teams that would gladly take him. So I'm interested to see how they recover, but I was really disappointed with them this season. Otherwise, I think the biggest surprise for me positively was probably the Vancouver Whitecaps. I know that's John Walsh's favorite team, and I think maybe other Jeff as well. But the Whitecaps, they're very vanilla. There's not a whole lot of star power on that team. There's not a lot of names that jump off the team sheet, but they actually spent a good portion of the season at the top of the West, especially towards the end there. They got overtaken by the other two, their Cascadian rivals, Portland and Seattle, at the end. But it was surprising how well they did. I think largely that had to do with that was largely down to how good they were at the back, particularly with Kendall Waston and the other center back whose name escapes me. Pat, Tony, you know off the top of your head?
I think it's fellow Ginger Tim Parker.
Tim Parker, that's who I'm thinking about. Yep. Yeah, so Tim Parker and Kendall Waston, I think, are largely to be credited for that, as well as bringing in on loan the striker Freddie Montero, who was a former MLS player and moved to a couple places, and then is now on loan with them from China. I'm interested to see if he wants to stick around in China or if he's going to make a return permanently back to MLS. That I wouldn't mind seeing him become a mainstay. Plus, they also had help in attacking midfield from both Jordi Reyna and Christian Teixeira. So none of those names are really sexy names, but they really all contributed in a big way, and I think Vancouver, I think they really, in my opinion, they overperformed this season, and which I thought was kind of cool to see, because I was kind of down on them at the beginning of the season, and I will gladly hold my hands up to admit that I was wrong there.
Oh, don't worry. I'm forever. Josh will tell you. You listen to the podcast. I'm forever wrong each week I talk, so I'm completely okay with that. We've all done it. Josh, you haven't really got any sort of clubs that you follow specifically on this. You've had a nice little signing on FIFA who you found and you've enjoyed him. So I'm just gonna go to the well for something that I'm sure you can give an opinion on at least. LA Galaxy, we've kind of mentioned them in passing already with the Western Conference roundup, but finishing bottom of the Western Conference. Now, we obviously have grown up sort of in the David Beckham era, if you will, so that's when LA Galaxy probably first came to light as this, stars and stripes and all banging, all crashing through the door of fantasticness and Americanisms, and they were the what would be the word? The brand, I guess, of MLS when it first kicked off. Spectacular fall for them. Can you think of any other clubs in Europe maybe that you could compare that has been so high up and then has just fallen so dramatically?
Yeah, I think with LA Galaxy, it was certainly an odd one for me to see them tumbling down the league. I'm sure everyone has enjoyed it from a US standpoint. Because, as you see, you always like to see, the big teams fall, so to speak. But looking at what we've seen in Europe, to see someone capitulate so much, I think the only good thing for LA Galaxy is the fact that there's no relegation in MLS. So they're safe from that point of view. But having a look across the leagues, there's so many you can pick from just England. As a start, I would look at someone a bit like maybe Portsmouth as a recent one. Going with the FA Cup final, and that speed at which they deteriorated as a team was incredible. I know there was a lot of off-field problems that really led to that. Other ones I could think of was probably like Nottingham Forest post-Cloughy era, for all of the older people out there who can remember that. But it's really odd to see them fall so quickly and so damningly for their conference as well. Especially with Rapids together as well. As you say, they made the playoffs last season. They've had a lot of problems off the field surrounding ownership and certain other things. I believe some Arsenal fans may try and claim that they've seen similar problems, but
don't know what you mean.
It's not on the same level at all. Arsenal are quite privileged with the position they're in and the way that they are being managed. But as Jimmy has said, Kroenke out. Certainly, the Rapids fans will agree with you for sure. He has not necessarily done good things for them this season. Is Josh looking to take over there, Jimmy? I don't know if you know that, because he's taken over on the Nuggets, hasn't he?
Josh Kroenke, this is, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, Josh Kroenke.
I haven't heard one way or the other. It wouldn't necessarily surprise me, especially with the interest he's kind of taken in Arsenal. I think he probably knows the game better than his dad does. But I know.
So do my cats, Jimmy.
This is true. You have a great point. But I think Josh has taken over. I think he said like the Nuggets. I think he may have taken over the Avalanche, the hockey team as well. So whether he's looking to take on either the football teams, not American football, but Arsenal or Colorado Rapids. I don't know. I kind of doubt, but at the same time, it wouldn't surprise me if Stan handed over the reins at least for the Rapids to Josh at some point.
Yeah, and so just as a thing for what Josh Kroenke's like as a chairman, he did some pretty drastic things at the Nuggets. I know he got rid of their manager pretty quickly to try and turn them around. That was a long-standing, successful manager that he fired. So he's not like his dad, who will quite happily sit on a manager who isn't necessarily doing as well as he could. We saw, to bring it back to American football, Jeff Fisher go last year from the Rams, and then bring in Sean McVay as a very young, up-and-coming manager to give him a chance. So perhaps that's what I was thinking we'd see potentially from the Rapids, as Josh taking over and him trying to use that as a project to rebuild them with a new manager coming in, and I think some of their big players are coming to the end of their careers as well, so a good chance of a refresh for that club. They've already changed the manager once last year. They fired their head coach Pablo Mastroianni, who was had a great mustache, but that's about all he had going for him because he did well with them the year before that, mainly down to a really defensive style of play. But Mastroianni just could not get it done this year, and they fired him, and they brought in Pat. Help me out. Who did they bring in to replace him?
He was the New Zealand national team manager, Anthony Hudson.
That's right, Hudson. And Hudson hasn't really done much to improve them, but I don't think he's really had a whole lot of time. He only had about half a season, if that. So, we'll see if they want to take a punt on another manager or give Hudson some more time next season, a full season, to see what he can do. But like I said, so they changed their manager once, but I don't think it really helped them, at least in the short term. So it's still kind of up in the air.
Never underestimate the power of change at any club. I guess it's going to be. I think whatever football you follow, whatever league, there's always seems to be something changing with some club somewhere, and ownership is obviously a hot topic. But a hot topic that we will probably pick up on in future pods, as opposed to this one, because we're going to just sort of talk now a little bit about the upcoming final from two different perspectives. Pat, it would only be fair of me to give you Seattle and Jimmy to have TFC. And obviously, we've mentioned both clubs in some fair detail already. So rather than going over old ground, we just want to maybe compare and contrast to where these two clubs were this time last season. MLS Cup was contested between these two last season, and we shall start with you, Pat. In terms of Seattle are the defending champions, so it could be back to back. I don't know the answer to this question, so you can answer this for me. Has MLS Cup ever been retained? And if it hasn't, or even if it has, what's your thoughts on this final? Are we going to get an MLS Cup final that we can enjoy this season? Because it went to penalties last year. I always look for the good in games, but I struggled. I'll be honest. I really struggled last year. So what sort of final are we going to get? And if you care to make a prediction, which I'm pretty sure I know which way that prediction is going to go, but what's your thoughts on this final on Saturday week, I think it is?
Yeah. To answer one of the questions in there, the last time MLS Cup was retained was in 2012. 2011, 2012, the Los Angeles Galaxy won it back-to-back years, also against the same opponent. So, yes, Jimmy, DC United won back-to-back cups in 1996 and 1997. So, and as well as the Houston Dynamo in 2005 and 2006, 2007. So it has been done before. So that bodes well for me. In terms of Seattle, things are drastically different. For one, that, as I mentioned before, they have Clint Dempsey back, and he's hitting form at the right time. This is a shout out to my good friend Cameron in Boston. Sadly, we do not have Nelson Valdez anymore with the club, so he will not be starting, but he is technically a defending MLS Cup champion. That's a weird thing to say, but instead there's striker Will Bruin, who's also hitting form at the right time. If you haven't seen his the highlights from Seattle's game on Thursday, I suggest you go look for number 17 in green. You will be very impressed with what you see. He had a fantastic game. But the center back partnership of Marshall and Torres is as good as it's ever been, as well as Jovan Jones, if he plays on the back line, who I predicted at the beginning on our MLS preview season or preview show that he was likely to have a big move. He is actually MLS Cup will be his last game as a Sounder, where he is moving to the second division of Germany. I don't remember what team. All I know is I'm sad he's going. But there's that last year Seattle won MLS Cup without taking a single shot on target, which, say what you will, Chris, I thought it was a very interesting game.
You would.
I mean, I stood up the entire time watching it. He's going. Jovan Jones is going to Darmstadt as soon as MLS Cup is over. So that'll be. I'm sad to see him go, but it's a move that he very much deserves. But I won't give a score prediction for the final, but I will say Seattle will have at least one shot on goal. And I predict that a goal will be scored in regular time. So that's much.
I'm holding you to this.
That is as unbiased as I'll go. But with that being said, go Sounders.
I like it. A case for the defence in that case then, Jimmy. What do you think TFC need to do to win this final? Because this is very much, I think the pressure's on them, isn't it? I mean, this is their season. This is they were a lot of people's favourites to make the final again. They're now a lot of people's favourites to claim the title. So what do they have to do to win this final?
Well, at the risk of threatening Pat's and my friendship, I have Toronto pegged to win the whole thing this year. I think they're going to win the final, just because I mean they're granted that their current form may not be quite as hot as Seattle's is. Seattle really put Houston to the sword, whereas Toronto kind of grinded out a 1-0 over two legs, 1-0 aggregate against the Crew. But I mean, obviously, for that first leg, they didn't have either Altidore or Giovinco, so that they should have both of them, provided Altidore's ankle's okay going into the final. I think so. He'll have two weeks to get that strengthened and healthy again. But really, that. They showed their class during the regular season and what they're able to do, and I think they're going to take that into the final. I think Vanny is going to have his team up for it. I think one thing they're really going to need to do is they're going to need to work the outside, especially their right side, Seattle. Excuse me, their left side, Seattle's right side, because. Like Pat said, Jovan Jones really is an excellent right back, but there's been some question marks for Seattle at Jovan Jones has been an excellent left back, but there's been some question marks for Seattle at right back. But on Toronto's left side, they have Justin Morrow, who is one of the best attacking wingbacks in the league at present time. Even though he's getting a little bit older, but he hasn't slowed down a whole lot. So if they can attack that right side, I think that's going to be they're going to see a lot of success from there. They have the talent to work the middle, but credit where it's due. Seattle have a really good central midfield partnership in Ozzy Alonso and Christian Roldan. So that could really be a kind of a slugfest there. We'll see kind of to some extent Michael Bradley, but mostly I think we're going to see Marquis Delgado and Victor Valdez trying to break down that pair in the middle. But at the end of the day, they have two of the best strikers in the league. Seattle's defense, their center backs they're good, but they're definitely getting older. So they might try to exploit that in terms of speed, with Giovinco being one of the quickest, maybe not top speed, but definitely in terms of acceleration and agility. I think they're might try to exploit the center backs' age a little bit, and both of those players, when they I think Altidore is pretty much, Giovinco is pretty much always on his game, but when Altidore wants to turn it on, he can be very, very good and very, very hard to stop. And I think he's going to be up for this match, and it's going to be a close one. And I'm like Pat said, I'm predicting goals. I don't think it's going to go to a 0-0 penalty shootout again. I think it's not even going to go to extra time. I think we're going to see a winner in regulation. And honestly, I think we're going to see goals from both teams. Last year's, despite the goals, was okay. It was kind of boring. I'm not going to lie. I was going to say, despite no goals, it was exciting, but that's not true. But I think this one is actually going to be exciting, and we're going to see some goals. We're going to see some great attacking play, and I think, but as good as the Sounders are, and the Sounders are very, very good this year, I think we're going to see Toronto come out on top.
Interesting. Okay, well, there you go. You've heard it first. There's going to be goals. It's going to be really exciting, and it'll be the best game you've ever seen in your life. And if it isn't, then you can blame these two. I think that's basically what we're trying to say here. I jest, of course. But yeah, I'd be looking forward to it. And UK time, I don't know what time it will kick off, but it will be next Saturday night / Sunday morning, I think I'm right in saying. Let's see if we can find out, shall we? Yes, it is Saturday the 9th, 9 p.m. I think that's actually UK time. Does that sound right to you guys, American-wise? Does that sound about right?
Stand by. I'll tell you in just a second.
Okay, cool. We will double check. But one thing's for sure, if you are living in the UK and you have access to Sky Sports, you'll be able to watch it. So check your TV guides. Pat, you've got a quick stat you want to chuck in as well.
Yeah, I just want to throw a stick into the bicycle wheel that is Jimmy's defense. The Sounders haven't conceded a goal since October the 1st when they were in Philadelphia. So I just want to throw that out there. They did sign a right back from the Dutch league, I believe. Yes, they signed Kelvin Leerdam from Vitesse, I believe, who's really solidified that right back position. But that's as much defending as I'm going to do.
And that's fine. You don't need to do any more than you're happy to do. So and Jimmy has confirmed 4 p.m. Eastern time. Sorry, Josh and Jimmy have confirmed 4 p.m. Eastern time US, and 9 p.m. UK time. So yes, indeed, there you go. You don't even have to stay up late. So there's no excuses to watch this. And of course, we will cover the result in next week's podcast because Josh, we're recording on the Monday, so that will of course be after the final is played. So your homework, Josh, will be to watch that game. I'm telling you now. So there you go. We'll both be across it. Right. I'm not giving any choice, by the way. That's just what has to happen. Unless, of course, you're working, in which case I'll send you a recording.
I was going to say, so long as it doesn't clash with the Rams, then I'll be all eyes on it.
Okay. Multi-screen. We'll do a GoFundMe campaign to get you another screen.
Yes, please.
It will be hopefully be a good final. We will be across it. But before we wrap up the pod, we've got just a little bit of time left for a couple of questions and indeed some US men's national team ranting. I tell you what, in the interest of time, Jimmy, I'm gonna let you free from this one. Seeing as Pat brought it up, I'm gonna throw him spectacularly under the bus here. Pat, you have got roughly 2 minutes to say what you wish about the US men's national team. Failed to qualify for the World Cup, change of head coach, seemingly change of emphasis on younger players. All sorts is going on. So you have a couple of minutes. Rant away.
Well, thank you. My rant is actually going to be about most of the people that feel like ranting. This is a bit of a hot take on hot takes, but I feel like as an up and coming football or soccer nation, this is just a part of the growing pains. We've been very lucky to consistently make the World Cup for quite a while and have relative success in the World Cup. Usually getting out of the group a few years, excluding a few years, but obviously it's time for a change in a lot of respects with the manager, with a lot of players. With some players, we just need to say, okay, bye-bye, thank you for everything you've done. Let's move on, and get a lot of younger players in there. But there are a lot of young, exciting players coming up. But does U.S. soccer need to burn, just tear everything down and start from the bottom up? No, that's only going to make things a little more chaotic. We just need to look at ourselves and see, okay, what do we need to do as a nation of soccer/football fans, and just make ourselves better. Has MLS hurt the U.S. men's national team? Not exactly. It's up to the individual players that have come back to the league or decided. For example, two players from Kansas City, Matt Beasler and Graham Zusi, both had big offers, especially Matt Beasler. He had a big offer from Fulham that he turned down after the 2014 World Cup, but decided to stay here, and that's completely on them. The issue is right now there are so many little hoops that players that want to leave the league have to go through to get out. So that's making, there's not a lot of incentive for clubs to sell players abroad. I could keep going on and on and on, but I think I'll end it there.
Well, I mean, I know what you mean. There's so you literally could do a pod on the whole situation, couldn't you? There's so many variables and changes needed. The one thing we can say is they have got nice new kits coming out, and we all know that that's the most important thing in terms of football. So it's not always a bad thing. But no, I'm kind of with you. For such a large nation, you'd have to feel that with the improvement of MLS and the players coming through in MLS, it needs to be something reflected on the national stage in the long run. Otherwise, what's the point? So we will of course stay across what happens moving forwards. But moving forwards in this podcast, as we say, to round up our special today, we're going to do a little few of your questions, see if we can get a few answers as best we can in the time allowed. Josh, I'm going to start us off. If you can just have a quick look at our Twitter feed and make sure I don't miss any questions, that will be super. But as I scroll down the list, I'll see if I can find our first question. We had kind of an amusing one, actually, which came from Stanton Oak Frames at Stanton Oak. Says, hasn't Victoria Beckham got an MLS team? Maybe he means David. I don't know. But well, I suppose technically it's the same thing, isn't it? But I wanted to give that one a mention. But the first one I can see on the timeline is from Chris Lodato, who's a regular. I think he's a Orlando City fan, actually. And he says, do you think Orlando City will finally be able to build on the productive team with the money created from Kaká and other players now coming off the bill? I'm going to give this one actually to you, Pat, because Jimmy mentioned earlier on about you're not particularly a huge fan of Orlando. So what do you make of that question from Chris? Do you think that's something that could change now they're getting the likes of Kaká off the wage bill?
Yeah, just as a disclaimer, my lovely girlfriend is from Central Florida, and to try to get her into the sport, I've gone with her to a couple Orlando games. So that's been really fun. So I have a soft spot for them because if they do well, that means she's interested, which means she's more likely to get up at 6:30 in the morning on a Saturday and tolerate watching Arsenal. We'll go with that. But anyway, we're seeing a very interesting shift in MLS. Over the years, it's gotten the reputation of the Henrys, the Beckhams, David Villa, Frank Lampard, Pirlo, Kaká. As we're in this, we're at the end of one era and the beginning of another, being the end of the transition phase in MLS, where we've just seen two teams come into the league that didn't sign any big name players in Orlando and Minnesota. There are a number of players that became big stars in Atlanta, Miguel Almiron, Joseph Martinez, guys like that. Nope, Jimmy, I'm going to have to disagree with you. Kenwyn Jones is not necessarily the star player Atlanta was looking for, who I believe just retired. So congratulations to him on a great career.
I did say I was kidding.
No, I did not see that part. My bad. But actually, reports came out that Wesley Sneijder's agent was just in Los Angeles to talk with LAFC and the Galaxy in getting him a contract, and both teams declined. They had zero interest in signing him. So we're seeing a shift of players coming into the league that aren't necessarily the 32, 33, 35-year-olds, big name Champions League winners, Premier League, La Liga winners that we've seen in the past. We're starting to see a lot more big name players, relatively unknown players come into the league and become big names that then get transferred to European or South American clubs. So overall, I'd love to see Orlando kind of shift that salary around, if they're going to keep Kyle Larin, maybe give him a decent strike partner or somebody next to him, maybe somebody in the midfield or defense. Former U.S. national team player Jonathan Spector just went to Orlando this past season, and he had a pretty decent year at the beginning. But yeah, I think Orlando, they built the hype with Kaká. They built the hype in the city with getting Kaká, and they have the name recognition throughout the country and the rest of the league, and in a state that frankly had two MLS teams at the very beginning and both folded, in Tampa Bay and Miami. So yeah, I think hopefully next year we see a lot of great things with Orlando.
Pat, real quick, you mentioned Kyle Larin. Do you think they'll be able to keep him around, or do you think he'll be ready to move because he's been kind of linked with the move abroad? Do you think bringing in Dom Dwyer was a move to convince him to stay with a good partner, or do you think he's brought in more as a replacement?
I've been saying he was going to move. Like I didn't even think he was going to make it through the 2015 season before transferring out. So at this point, I have no idea.
He's one on the radar, isn't he? He's definitely one that I think people are looking at. I wouldn't be surprised to see him move, but equally, I suppose, depending on what the offers are, I actually think he's a player that could possibly make the step into Europe, not with a big side, if I'm honest, but his movement alone, I think maybe would get him goals in one of the leagues, maybe even championship level, potentially. I don't know if Josh might have a thought on that, but we've seen a few players that have come over just below the top level and have succeeded. So I wonder if maybe he could be another one. But actually, Josh, I wanted to pick on you with this next question because we've kind of covered with the guys about sort of US men's national team, but just from a complete outsider perspective, have you got a thought from Dr. Mantis Toboggan's question at 49 unbeaten? He said, what are your guys' opinions on how MLS should change in order to improve the quality of players in the US men's national team, or should they change it all? From a complete neutral perspective, Josh, how would you how would you sort of change it? Because we get a lot of this in England, don't we, about how can we make England great again, quote unquote. And we talk a lot about grassroots football in this country. Is it a case in MLS, we've said this before, where they just need to get younger players playing the sport? Because it's still not the go-to sport in the US, is it?
No, certainly not. We've seen it, as you say, in England. Every time we get knocked out of some form of major competition, it's right, completely rip it up. We're going to do this again. And then 2 years later, you revert to type and Gareth Southgate's heading up your national team. But, it's something that's intrinsic across the leagues as well. I think we discussed in the last main pod about the fact that a lot of English teams come out with these bright ideas of what they're going to do. They're going to change this great type of football and then revert back to the type. And you've seen recently the big four kind of English managers all go back in and get jobs with Allardyce, Hodgson, Pardew, and I've missed one and I can't remember what I started with.
Allardyce, Pardew, Hodgson. There is another one, isn't there?
Yep, it wasn't Pulis.
Somebody else.
It's another English manager, and I cannot think who it is.
No. I'm sure it'll come to us. I'm trying to think who's just been employed recently, but yeah, carry on.
Yeah. Anyway, so the US don't really have that. They did a little bit with Bruce Arena going back to try and salvage the qualification process. So I think it's a case of what they need to do, and this is what I'd like England to do, is actually get a manager in and, stick with them and help with the progression and sort it out. Personally, for me, I wanted Jurgen Klinsmann, I thought, when he came in to completely rip up US soccer. I think that was the perfect manager to kind of re-establish a system. It's just a case you then need to get someone in to push on from there. With it being an attractive prospect of the US being obviously one of the biggest countries, but with a relatively small, kind of pool of talent, it could be interesting for what they'd be able to do. But to be honest, I don't think I've got the answer of a perfect person to come in and completely fix that job. But as you say, you need to have a look at the fact that the one thing that the US were doing superbly was bringing through top goalkeepers, and it's appeared that there is a big generation gap in that. So I think it is a case of perhaps going back to basics and trying to re-establish the things they were doing well and doing them well again, really.
Yeah, it's very, very hard, isn't it, to just restart a whole country's style or setup. It's very, very difficult, but it's one that will be interesting to see if it does happen or not. This is a good question, Jimmy. Rich, I'm gonna take a punt at Muley. At Muley Designs. Hopefully I'm right. I could be completely wrong, Rich. Sorry if I'm wrong. Which stadium is the worst field to play on? Which stadium is the worst because of the fans? And which has the best atmosphere? This is something that always comes up when we talk about MLS. State of the pitches, 3G, 4G, fan support. I don't know if you heard the audio from the game between Seattle and Houston the other night. There was one particular fan who just kept on getting on, I think it was Vasquez's back. Was it Vasquez or Sanchez? One of the two. And you could hear it like clear as day constantly on the commentary, which was quite amusing. But we always talk about atmospheres and quality of pitches. So what do you think, Jimmy? What's your thoughts on that question?
I was on mute. Sorry.
That's all right.
I think the worst pitch to play on has probably got to be New England. They play in Gillette Stadium, which is where the New England Patriots play. It is turf. It is 3G, and I mean it's hard to play football on a 3G pitch just because it kills the knees, from what I understand. It kind of discourages sliding because it'll tear up your legs and all, and the ball just moves differently. So I think Pat, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Seattle also has a 3G pitch, but I don't think it's quite as bad. But in terms of the stadium itself, I'd say probably the best the best stadium in terms of atmosphere and crowd experience, Pat's going to kill me for this, but I think it's got to be the Portland Timbers. The Portland Timbers always have the place is just always packed out. The Timbers Army is one of the best and biggest supporters groups in all of the country. They have Timber Joey with his chainsaw, which how they allow a chainsaw in a soccer stadium in 2017 still baffles me. But he's still there for every game, cutting off pieces of a log for every time that he the Timbers manage to score, and that stadium is always just erupting in just noise for the entire game. And then a special shout out to Orlando City with their new stadium as well. They did a really good job of designing that. They have safe standing terraces, and the stadium is basically what you want to see from future MLS stadiums. So those would be the ones that I would pick out.
I love the look of the Atlanta Stadium as well. By the way, that just looks gorgeous.
That's true. They managed to set records for attendance this past year in their first year of existence, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous stadium to look at and good atmosphere as well. You just got a quick point on this, Pat, as well?
Yeah, I've been to quite a few MLS stadiums, most of the stadiums in the East and one or two out West. I'm going to throw out a hipster pick and say that I really enjoyed the San Jose Earthquakes Stadium, Avaya Stadium. It's just gorgeous out there because you can, at the end of one of the behind one of the goals, you just see some mountains, which is just really cool. But most of the it's not traditional, but most of the seats are kind of up high. And me personally, I prefer to be further back up so I can kind of see all the team as a whole and how they're defending and how they're attacking, how they're moving as a shape. So if that's your style, I would very much recommend Avaya Stadium for a San Jose Earthquakes game. And also, they have the largest outdoor bar in North America, which it's double-sided, and it's all it's the length of the end line. So it's a really big bar. So that is a really fun place to go watch a game.
What more could you ask for than a very large bar? I like it.
Special quick shout out for RFK DC United Stadium. I said it before. This is kind of my tagline for it. It was a piece of crap, but it was our piece of crap, and I loved it to the very end. So rest in peace, RFK.
I like it. I still have plans one day to visit Chicago and actually take in a game at Soldier Field as well. One day it will happen. So hopefully, if I do, I will let you all know how it is. But wait for a little while.
I have to throw in the Whitecap Stadium as well.
Yes.
I was
BC place, is it?
Yeah, because I was in Vancouver. That is an absolutely stunning stadium from outside and in.
As a FIFA player as well, Josh, it's one of those stadiums you always buy on Ultimate Team, isn't it? It's one of those you just go, I'll just tuck that away.
Yeah, maybe just you.
Yeah, maybe just me, yeah.
No, it is an incredible stadium. Just in England, the stadiums I've been to, they've not necessarily been the most aesthetically pleasing, should we say. I'm thinking mainly the Withdean. And also Watford Stadium. Actually, no, I can add quite a few to that. Swindon Stadium, that's not very nice.
No.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there are some problems with the infrastructure, but because the MLS is so new, you've got so many of these stunning stadiums about as well. It's just absolutely incredible.
Good fun, isn't it? Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, we've got just about enough time to squeeze in 3 final questions. So we'll keep these answers as short as we can, as best we can. Pat, this one's for you. Seamus McNulty, at Seamus is a Ninja. With the forced relocation of Columbus seeming to be a done deal, is this an end of an era for MLS and into a new era of MLS becoming a real American-based league, faults and all?
First, I want to give a shout out to Seamus. He's a good friend of mine back in Syracuse. he and I have a mutual displeasure for Toronto. He's a Montreal fan. He's gone up to a bunch of games. He went to university just south of Montreal, so he would always drive up to games. So, Seamus, thanks for that question. Really appreciate it. In terms of the forced relocation, it's a touchy subject, so I'll try to be as neutral on the matter as possible. Obviously, I'm #SaveTheCrew, but it's strange because we actually have seen this happen before. San Jose, who was one of the original members of the league, actually relocated to Houston for a few years, and then they brought the club back in San Jose. Am I supporting the move, the proposed move of Columbus to Austin? No, but I'm not trying not to be in defense of what the owner's doing, because it's absolutely heinous to try to move a club, literally the first team in MLS, the first team also to have a soccer specific field and everything. Crew Stadium it's a lovely stadium that I want to go back to next season. But on that note, we've seen it before. It's very weird because we are, American sports relocate all the time. The Los Angeles Lakers used to be in Minnesota. And it happens, but also, you don't see that happen with a lot of football clubs around the world. So it's really, I wouldn't say it's the end of an era. I'd say it's more of a shatter of reality, in that, unfortunately, football is a money-making, it's a money-making business. As much as everyone hates to hear that, it's not great. I just got myself kind of sad right now. But,
No, I'm with you. It is whether a club's got a rich tradition and history and all the jazz that goes with it or not. It is sad. You're absolutely right. It's and for the fans that follow certain teams as well, it's very easy to be. I think you get a lot of people particularly in the UK, when we talk about US soccer, and they get a bit sniffy about it. Oh, well, these clubs haven't got any history. I hear it a lot about Paris Saint-Germain, of course, not a traditional old-fashioned club. They were established quite late in the day. It's a club. It's got fans. It doesn't matter if they were established yesterday or tomorrow. It's still a club. It's still got fans, and it's still a club that people love. And to move it, it's just.
On that note, I just want to say shout out to every single person that has signed a petition, used the hashtag #SaveTheCrew, especially speaking personally. I know Jimmy can attest to this. At the very last game at RFK Stadium, there was a big banner across the supporter section for the DC United fans that said "Save the Crew." Basically, everyone across the league, with the exception of a few, shame on you, Toronto fans waving the Texas flag during your match, has come out in support of keeping the Crew in Columbus. So shout out to everyone that has come out in support of that.
Yeah, well said. And good question. Thank you, Seamus, for that one. And of course, if we get any more updates, we will let you know on the situation. I'm going to quickly answer this one from Dougie Cazorla, and then Jimmy can round us off with a question from his friend. Dougie wanted to ask, does Tata Martino have a long-term future at Atlanta United, and will they be able to retain their stars? I'm going to answer the first bit and say yes, absolutely, because he's kind of rebuilt his career off the back of Atlanta. And I think he realises, looking back at the Barcelona experiment, that didn't really work out so well, and I think he's settled and he seems happy. I think he's maybe looked at Marcelo Bielsa, for example, this season, and maybe will think twice before moving to a club in Europe again. But just straightforward yes or no. Jimmy first, will they keep their stars, particularly Almiron?
I think they'll keep some of their stars and not Almiron. I think Almiron's going to go, which will hurt, but I think they are going to keep the likes of Joseph Martinez and Julian Gressel.
Okay, I'll let you off the yes or no then, because there was a bit of a caveat, so I'll give you that. Pat, same question to you.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that question? I'm looking at EPL scores right now. Shame on me.
Yeah, sure. No problem. Basically, it's kind of a straightforward yes or no. Will Atlanta United be able to keep their stars such as Martinez, Gressel, Assad, and Almiron?
Yes, for the most part.
That's fine. I can take that. Yeah, I can take that. It will be interesting to see how many people might take a gamble, particularly on Almiron, who was linked with Arsenal many years ago, which Josh will remember well, I'm sure. And our final question then, it comes from Mike Hernandez at USA Guna 1886. This one was to Jimmy directly, and it's quite a good one actually. Think teams in smaller markets will ever have a fair shot at signing star players, Dos Santos brothers, Henry, Beckham, etc. Jimmy, what do you reckon?
To be honest, I don't think so. I think the best that kind of smaller teams can hope for is to look for players that can become players kind of those caliber. DC United being a good example. We found Luciano Acosta as basically kind of not necessarily rotting, but way down the pecking order at Boca Juniors. Brought him in for a loan with an option to buy and brought him on permanently, and he's been one of our best players. I think so. You don't necessarily have to bring in established stars in MLS, which I think is kind of the beauty of it. They're even though the level may not be as high as some of the European leagues, at least not yet. You can bring in some talented players that maybe aren't names and be competitive. I think we're seeing a lot of Atlanta did this hugely, looking at leagues like Costa Rica and Argentina, finding players that are playing there that maybe aren't getting the time they want and bringing them in, and they're becoming, and especially the younger ones, that are becoming stars right in front of our eyes. I don't think many people knew who Miguel Almiron was before he showed up at Atlanta. So I think kind of the best, some of these smaller market teams could look for is to bring in some players that maybe be kind of on the fringes of the national team, and some of the stars or some of the other players that are currently in other leagues down in the Southern Hemisphere, and then bring them up and turn them into stars, turn them into household names in America. I've really enjoyed getting to watch some of these players come into MLS and make names for themselves and earn all-star spots. So I don't, while it may not necessarily sell tickets without the sexy names, you can, if you bring in the right players and play the right brand of football, you can still put butts in seats.
Yep. Yeah, it's one of those sort of how do we put it, where clubs have to sort of build almost reputations before they can get signings, or a big name player maybe likes the idea of sort of big fish, little pond kind of situation. Can I go and make a real impression? And when you see someone like David Villa getting back into the Spain squad, it does make you wonder if certain players might take the dip into playing regularly. And Paulinho is the other one I suppose you could look at and say, gone to a league that isn't necessarily classed as a high caliber league, but then get signed for Barcelona. So if you play him well, absolutely, and coaches see you'll get signed. That's kind of how we look at it.
One thing I should mention on the matter is the fact that basically it's, without getting too much into details, for a lot of the players coming into MLS from other leagues like Europe, they do have to go through an allocation process. So teams that that maybe aren't doing so hot can be higher up on the allocation process, so they get first dibs on these star players, but they may not be able to. May not have the cash to pay their salaries. So a lot of them will trade away their allocation spot for allocation money or something like that, or a draft spot, just because they can't afford to pay the salaries of these stars. So they'll trade the rights to acquire them to some of the bigger teams, but they're still getting something out of it by doing so.
Mm. Yep. Yeah. Well said. Well said. And I think it's a good place to wrap up the pod, actually, because it's one thing's for sure is that as the seasons or as the years progress, MLS is definitely becoming a more followed league. And certainly the sort of feedback we've had from doing these specials is that people enjoy us giving a different perspective from across the world and how things are. I think the next big change I'd like to see is maybe a move away from the same sponsorship deals. I know I'm all about the kits, but I noticed that Adidas are continuing this sort of sponsorship of all the shirts, for example. I'd like to see things change a little bit, so clubs have got their own kind of their own identities almost. But we shall see if that happens. When we're talking about clubs being moved, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but that's just me. Anyway, we'll leave it there then. Many thanks for you all for tuning in, if indeed you have. As I say, we appreciate it can be a bit niche sometimes, going outside the box, but that's mainly why we created this pod, so we could just do things a little bit differently. You know what we're like, hipsters and all that. So first of all, thank you very much, Josh, for sacrificing a couple of hours of your Saturday for pressing the buttons and chucking in your thoughts here and there.
That's all right. It wasn't a sacrifice. I enjoyed it.
Bless you. Thank you very much. Checks in the post. And of course, thank you to our stars of the show. Pat, thank you very much for your time. And where can people find you if they want to give you a little follow?
Chris, I want to thank you for the opportunity to come on here and just kind of talk at you guys about MLS. My two roommates aren't big into football as I am, so this is always a nice little group therapy session for me. You can find me on Twitter. I don't have for the life of me, I can't remember my Twitter handle off the top of my head, but you've tagged me in a couple of posts. So if you want some hot takes about the Seattle Sounders or why Arsenal isn't as good as we like to think they are, feel free to give me a follow or shout at me.
I can tell everybody you're at Pat Ormsby. That's ORMBS. SB. Right, Pat PATORMSBY_XC. There you go.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, just in case even I managed to nearly cock that up. And also, very quickly, Pat, we should mention, because I haven't done this live before, thank you in advance. We're going under a rebrand fairly soon, and you're at the heart of it. Don't give our listeners too much away, but things are looking good, aren't they, for our little change of imagery, as it were?
Yeah, I also want to give you guys or thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to do that. I kind of just reached out to you guys out of the blue saying, hey, if you want this, I'll do it. And sure enough, you did. But yeah, it's really exciting. It's something that I'm putting a lot of heart into. I don't get to do a lot of graphic design for football related subjects. So this has been a lot of fun for me, and I'm really excited to see how we as a team can make out of this.
Absolutely, yeah, and we're very thankful to you for it. And we're, of course, thankful to Jimmy as well, who, just in case he's forgotten, is at NN_Gooner. I'm sure he didn't. Jimmy, thank you very much for your time today as well, sir.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Chris. Just to echo Pat's sentiments, we really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about something that we love. Thanks to Pat as well for being the Sundance Kid to my Butch Cassidy. I wouldn't be able to talk half the stuff I have without you correcting me, which I appreciate. And I think we make a pretty good partnership. So thanks for everyone involved. This was always a great experience.
Jimmy, I will always be here to correct your mistakes. I got you.
I appreciate that.
Reaching out, that's what we like to see. Good stuff. Okay, well, thank you all very, very much for listening, and indeed for subscribing if you do. If you don't, please do. If you like these specials, we do a podcast on a Monday normally, depending on Josh and I's schedule. Also joined by lovely Lana and often Joel and Ross as well, who are equally lovely. So if you haven't heard of us before, we're at the FH podcast on Twitter. You can find our work on SoundCloud, on iTunes, on YouTube. We're all over the place, basically. So just have a look for us and tweet us your thoughts. We'll be back with some more specials, I'm sure, very soon. I know Josh and myself are talking about doing a few bits and bobs along with Ross and Joel. So keep an eye on the website, keep an eye on the Twitter. And we'll be back with a regular podcast very soon. When you're listening to this, it could be next week, because we're not sure when we're going to release this pod yet. But we'll be MLS Cup final. So whether you're Seattle or TFC, enjoy the game, and we'll speak to you all very soon.